A razor-sharp family drama that starts with a single cruel insult and erupts into a high-stakes tale of betrayal, revenge and rebirth. An elderly mother, Matilda, arrives at her only daughter Rachel's engagement party and is publicly humiliated, branded miserable, dismissed as a nobody and shamed by Rachel and her new in-laws. Instead of pleading, Matilda quietly walks away. The twist: the poor woman they scorn has secretly built an $34 million fortune. She disappears to a secluded chalet in Switzerland, not to hide but to plan. What follows is a masterclass in controlled, elegant retaliation. Matilda watches and learns. She hires investigators, gathers evidence, and quietly arms allies, including the maid and a trustworthy lawyer. She discovers that Rachel's fiancé, Horacio, is bankrupt, unfaithful and planning to saddle Rachel with massive debts. She exposes forged documents, secret loans, and a double life Horacio has been hiding. Then she executes the piece de resistance, a dramatic public unmasking timed to the wedding. A press conference that shatters the bridal narrative, reveals Rachel's attempts to sell property fraudulently, and detonates a scandal that destroys reputations and unravels the engagement. But the story isn't mere payback. Matilda's revenge is surgical and principled. She aims to protect her daughter from financial ruin, to make the truth unavoidable, and to reclaim dignity stolen by years of ingratitude. Horacio is arrested. Rachel is devastated, stripped of status and comforts, and forced to face the consequences of choosing money and social image over filial love. Matilda doesn't gloat. She sets terms, forces accountability, and watches as the fragile empire of lies collapses. The emotional core is complex. Matilda, who sacrificed 3 decades to raise Rachel, wrestles with conflicting impulses: fury, righteous vindication, and an unexpected resurgence of maternal compassion when Rachel reaches rock bottom. Matilda anonymously funds Rachel's psychiatric care and watches, from afar, the slow, painful work of recovery. Forgiveness never becomes easy. The mother chooses self-preservation over a return to being trampled, and the bond is irreparably changed. By the end, the narrative rewards a satisfying moral. Kindness without boundaries can become self-destruction, and dignity must be defended. Matilda emerges transformed, wealthy, unbowed, free, while Rachel rebuilds a shattered life and learns the harsh lesson that some words and choices have permanent costs. The tale closes on a bittersweet note. Justice served, wounds beginning to heal, but a family forever split by pride and consequence. Gripping, theatrical, and emotionally precise, this story will hook readers who love morally complex protagonists, meticulous revenge plots, and the uneasy redemptive aftermath when power meets conscience. Get out of here, you miserable woman. You're a nobody. ****. Those were the words my own daughter Rachel screamed at me on the day of her engagement, right in front of all her guests. She threw me out of her house as if I were trash. What she didn't know was that I, Margaret, 70 years old, had just sold my company for $34 million. But that day I chose to stay silent. I simply said, "That's fine, dear," and walked away without a fight. The next day I moved into my villa in Switzerland. 3 weeks later, she would be on her knees begging for my forgiveness. It all began when I arrived at her house for the celebration of her engagement to Henry. I carried a gift, an elegant box containing a genuine pearl necklace I had bought in Paris. I was excited to share that special moment with my only daughter. But from the moment I stepped inside, I noticed the condescending stares. Guests whispered behind their glasses. Henry ignored me completely, and Rachel acted as if my presence embarrassed her. "Mom, what are you doing here?" she asked coldly as I approached to congratulate her. "I came to celebrate with you, sweetheart. It's your engagement." Rachel looked me up and down, her eyes judging my simple brown dress and worn-out shoes. She had no idea that behind that humble appearance stood a woman who could have bought everything in that room without blinking. "Look, Mom," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This is an elegant event. People of importance are here. You can't just show up dressed like a cleaning lady and expect to fit in." Her words sliced through me like knives. Guests stifled their laughter. Henry stepped closer with a smug grin. "Margaret," he said smoothly, "I think it'd be best if you left. This isn't really your crowd." I stayed calm, though inside my heart was tearing apart. "I only wanted to give you this," I said, handing her the small box. Rachel took it without even opening it. "Thanks. But next time please check with me before coming. Not every event is for everyone." The humiliation was complete. 40 people staring at me as if I were an intruder in my own daughter's life. But the worst was yet to come. Barbara, Henry's mother, approached with an air of superiority. "Dear Margaret," she said sweetly, "I understand you want what's best for Rachel, but you must realize she's part of our family now, a family of certain social standing. Perhaps it would be best if you kept a respectful distance." Rachel nodded in approval of her future mother-in-law. "Mom," she said firmly, "Barbara's right. You need to understand your place. I'm not the little girl who depended on you anymore. I have a successful life now, a bright future, and honestly your presence embarrasses me." My world collapsed in that moment. I remembered all the years I had worked myself to exhaustion to give her the best education possible, all the sacrifices I had made so she would never lack anything. I sold my first apartment to pay for her college. I gave up romantic relationships to dedicate myself fully to her. And now, she treated me as if I were nothing but a burden. "Embarrassing," I repeated, my voice trembling. The guests leaned closer, eager to witness the drama. Rachel stood with her hands on her hips, defiant. "Yes, Mom, embarrassing. Look around. These people are successful entrepreneurs and professionals. What could you possibly contribute? What could you even talk about with them?" Henry added his cruelty with calculated precision. "Let's be honest, Margaret. You live in a rented apartment. You have no savings, no higher education. Rachel deserves to surround herself with people on her level." Each word was a dagger, perfectly aimed to humiliate me. Barbara added her poison with feigned elegance. "It's nothing personal, dear. We simply believe Rachel should focus on her new life, without distractions from the past." That word, distractions, echoed in my ears like a death sentence. Rachel stepped closer, her eyes filled with contempt. "Mom, I'll make this clear so you understand once and for all. I don't want you at my wedding. I don't want you in my new life. You belong to the past, and that's where you should stay." The room fell into an unbearable silence. 40 pairs of eyes fixed on me, waiting for my reaction. I felt my soul shatter into 1,000 pieces, but somewhere deep inside, a voice I hadn't heard in years began to awaken. For the first time in my life, my daughter had crossed a line she could never return from. That was the moment I decided I would never again swallow my pride. "All right, my dear," I said in a calm voice that surprised even me. "You're right. I'm no longer part of your life." I picked up my purse, turned around and walked to the door. As I left, I heard the malicious laughter of the guests and their whispered comments. "Poor woman," one said. "How pathetic," added another. That night, alone in my apartment, I made a decision that would change everything. I cried harder than I had in decades, but amid the tears, something powerful awoke inside me. A cold, calculated fury, a determination that had slept for too long. I went to my desk and opened the secret drawer no one knew about. Inside were bank statements, property titles, investment certificates, $34 million waiting for my command. Rachel had no idea who her mother truly was. To her, I was a poor, pitiful old woman. But the truth was very different. For 40 years, I had built a financial empire from the shadows. While she studied and partied, I invested every penny I earned. Real estate in 3 countries, shares in multinational corporations, high-yield investment funds, all under my name alone. At dawn, I called my lawyer, Arthur. "I need to see you urgently," I told him. "It's time to activate the plan we prepared years ago." Arthur was the only person who knew my true financial situation. He had managed my transactions, protected my assets, and kept my secret for decades. "Are you finally going to reveal your fortune?" he asked, intrigued. Not exactly, I replied with a bitter smile. I'm going to disappear for a while. But before that, I want Rachel to learn a lesson she'll never forget. Arthur understood immediately. He knew the entire story of my sacrifices for my daughter, how much I had suffered in silence. That very morning I packed only the essentials. 3 suitcases with simple clothes, personal documents, and photographs of Rachel as a little girl. I left everything else exactly as it was. I wanted it to look as though I had truly left, a defeated, humiliated woman. But the truth was very different. As I packed, I remembered the day Rachel was born. When I was 30 years old, single and living alone, I decided to adopt Rachel, the little girl no one else wanted. The first years were extremely hard. I worked 3 jobs just to provide for her. I studied at night to improve my career prospects. I gave up any form of social life so I could devote myself entirely to her. Every penny I earned was split in 2. Half for our basic needs, and the other half for investments that would secure our future. Rachel never knew she was adopted. I told her that her father had died when she was a baby. She never questioned it, never asked for details. She simply accepted that we were a family of 2. And I devoted every part of my soul to being the best mother I could possibly be. Apparently, it hadn't been enough. I called Elliot, my trusted accountant. I want you to transfer $5 million to the Swiss account immediately, I instructed. And prepare all the paperwork to activate the European properties. I'm leaving for an indefinite period. Elliot had worked with me for 20 years. He knew that once I made a decision, it was final. What should I do if Rachel asks about you? He asked carefully. Tell her her mother was exactly what she thought, a poor woman who left in shame, I replied coldly. But keep all my assets protected. I may need them soon. Before leaving, I wrote a letter that I wouldn't send right away. Dear Rachel, for 70 years I have lived for others. First for my parents, then for you. I never once asked myself what I wanted. Yesterday you gave me the answer. I want dignity. I want respect. And if I can't have them with you, I will find them somewhere else. Your mother, who is no longer a burden. The taxi arrived at 6 in the morning, a black Mercedes I had hired to take me directly to the private airport. But before departing, I made one last phone call. Henry, I said when he picked up, surprised. It's Margaret. I just wanted to thank you. Thank me. For what? He asked, confused. For showing me who you truly are, and for showing me who my daughter becomes when she's with you. I hung up before he could answer. The private jet was already waiting on the runway. Destination: Zurich, Switzerland. My chalet in the Swiss Alps awaited, a silent refuge where I could plan my next move. But before boarding, I made one more decision. I called Maria, Rachel's housekeeper. Maria, it's Margaret. Can you do me a favor? Maria had always been kind to me, unlike my own daughter. Of course, Mrs. Margaret. What do you need? I want you to observe everything that happens in that house over the next few weeks. If something important comes up, call me at this number. During the flight, I checked my bank accounts on my tablet. $34 million, strategically distributed around the world. Properties in Miami, Buenos Aires, Paris, and of course my beautiful Swiss chalet, where no one would find me until I chose to reappear. As the jet crossed the Atlantic, I smiled for the first time in years. Rachel had gotten exactly what she wanted, to get rid of her embarrassing mother. But very soon, she would realize she had made the biggest mistake of her life. The chalet in Switzerland was everything I needed, the perfect hideaway, invisible to the world until I decided otherwise. From my windows, I could see the snow-covered Alps, a landscape that soothed my spirit and cleared my mind. I had bought the property 5 years ago as an investment, but now it became my command center for what would come next. The first week, I allowed myself to rest and process everything that had happened. But during the second week, Maria called, with news that reignited my fury. Mrs. Margaret, she said anxiously, you need to know what's happening here. Rachel is telling everyone that you left because you couldn't afford your lifestyle. She says you were a financial burden, That's why you disappeared. What else is she saying? I asked, feeling rage rising in my chest. She's saying you never had any savings, that you lived on loans, and that reality finally caught up to you. Henry is telling people at work that his mother-in-law was a troublesome woman who didn't know her place. And Barbara. Maria hesitated. Barbara is organizing a party to celebrate that you're gone. My hands trembled with indignation. They hadn't just humiliated me publicly. Now they were destroying my reputation to paint themselves as heroes. Rachel had turned my absence into her personal victory. That wouldn't stand. That same night I called Arthur. I want you to investigate everything about Henry and his family, I said firmly. I need to know where their money comes from, what businesses they have, if they owe anyone, if they have enemies or secrets. Everything. Arthur, a brilliant lawyer with connections everywhere, didn't need more explanation. If there was something to uncover about my son-in-law, he would find it. Also, I continued, hire a private investigator. I want photos, videos, audio recordings. I want every move Rachel and Henry make documented over the next few weeks. But make sure it's discreet. They mustn't know we're watching. 3 days later, Arthur called back, with explosive information. Margaret, he said, I found something very interesting about Henry. His company is on the verge of bankruptcy. He owes 3 million pesos to several suppliers, and the bank is threatening to foreclose on his office property. Apparently, he had been maintaining appearances with borrowed money. Does Rachel know anything about this? I asked, my curiosity growing. According to my sources, she has no idea. Henry has been lying to her about his finances. In fact, he was counting on you leaving him an inheritance to save his business. That's why he was so upset when you left without leaving anything. The irony was delicious. Henry had despised me for supposedly being poor, when in reality, he was the one who was bankrupt. And my daughter, the same daughter who had thrown me out for being an embarrassment, was about to marry a man who couldn't even pay his own debts. But the most valuable information came a week later. The private investigator sent me a video that changed everything. Henry was at an upscale restaurant with a young woman. It was clearly not a business meeting. They were kissing, holding hands, acting like lovers. The date on the video was after his engagement to Rachel. Perfect, I murmured as I watched the video for the 3rd time. This is exactly what I needed. But before using that information, I decided to run a test. I wanted to see how far my daughter's cruelty would go. I called Rachel from an unknown number, pretending to be a social worker. Miss Rachel, we're looking for your mother, Margaret. We have some important documents for her. My mother doesn't live here anymore, Rachel replied coldly. She left because she couldn't support herself. I suppose she's in some nursing home or something. I'm not responsible for her. Her words cut through me like knives. She didn't even pretend to care about my well-being. Do you have a number where we can contact her? It's about a family inheritance, I insisted. Rachel laughed cruelly. Inheritance? My mother never had any rich relatives. Must be a mistake. And even if it's true, she's no longer part of my life. Look somewhere else. I hung up the phone with tears in my eyes, but also with an unshakable resolve. My own daughter had just signed her sentence. Not only had she erased me from her life, she was willing to deny me even the possibility of an inheritance. It was time she met the real Margaret. That night, in my study at the chalet, I began to design my revenge. First, I would dig deeper into Henry's financial situation. Second, I would use the video of his infidelity at the perfect moment. Third, I would return to the city when they least expected it, not as the humiliated woman who had left, but as the powerful woman I truly was. I called Elliot and gave him precise instructions. Prepare all the documentation for my properties and investments. We'll soon need to show irrefutable proof of my assets. Are you planning to reveal your fortune? He asked. Not just that, I replied with a smile he couldn't see. I'm going to give them the most expensive lesson of their lives. The plan was taking shape. Rachel had wanted to get rid of her embarrassing mother. Very soon, she would realize she had cast away the only person who had ever loved her unconditionally. And when she did, it would be too late for forgiveness. The 4th week in Switzerland brought news that fueled my thirst for justice even more. Mary called me completely shaken. "Mrs. Margaret, you have to hear this. Rachel is planning to sell the apartment where you used to live." "How is that possible?" I asked, shocked. "That apartment is in my name. She's telling everyone that you signed a power of attorney before you left, that you were so desperate you gave her everything so she wouldn't have to take care of you." My blood boiled. They hadn't just invented lies about my departure. Now they were trying to steal my property. But Rachel had made a fatal mistake. That apartment was only one of my smaller properties. I had kept it modest on purpose so no one would suspect my true financial situation. "Mary," I said, my voice calm but deadly, "I need you to do something for me. Record every conversation you can when Rachel talks about my supposed poverty, when she mentions the fake power of attorney, when she mocks me. Record everything." Mary immediately understood how serious my request was. That same afternoon I called Augustine. "Rachel is trying to sell a property that doesn't belong to her using forged documents. Start legal action immediately." "Do you want me to sue her for fraud?" my lawyer asked. "Not yet. Let her sink deeper into her lies. When she's completely exposed, then we strike." Meanwhile, the private investigator sent me even more devastating information about Henry. Not only was he bankrupt and cheating, but he had also been using Rachel's name to apply for loans without her knowledge. My daughter was about to marry a con artist who would leave her financially ruined. For a moment, I was tempted to warn her. Despite everything she had done to me, she was still my daughter. But then I remembered her words. Asterisk, "You're embarrassing. I don't want you in my new life." Asterisk. She had made her choice. Now she would have to live with the consequences. The 5th week brought the lowest blow of all. Mary sent me an audio recording that broke my heart. It was Rachel talking to her friends at her bachelorette party. "Your mom isn't coming to the wedding, right?" one of her friends asked. "Thank God no," Rachel replied between laughs. "She finally realized she doesn't belong in my life. She was so pathetic, always trying to impress my friends with her cheap gifts." "She really was awful," another friend added. "Can you imagine?" Rachel continued cruelly. "A 70-year-old woman who never owned anything, always fantasizing about being important. In the end, reality hit her, and she left with her tail between her legs. Henry says she's probably begging somewhere by now." The laughter of her friends echoed in my ears like poisoned daggers. My own daughter was celebrating my supposed misery, using my pain as entertainment for her guests. That night I cried for the last time. By dawn, the sadness had transformed into something far more powerful, relentless determination. I called Augustine with new instructions. "I want you to rent the presidential suite at the most exclusive hotel in the city. I also need a discreet security team and a professional photographer. It's time to go back." "Are you sure this is the moment?" he asked. "More than sure," I replied. "It's time for Rachel to meet her real mother." But before traveling, I needed a special preparation. I called my personal stylist in Paris. "I need a complete transformation: hair, makeup, wardrobe. I want to look like the successful woman I truly am." I also hired a chauffeur with a brand new Mercedes and a small entourage to make a memorable entrance. In the 6th week, while Rachel was finalizing the details of her wedding, I was finalizing the details of my revenge. The private investigator confirmed that Henry had scheduled an appointment at a notary's office for the day after the wedding. Apparently, he was planning to have Rachel sign documents that would make her responsible for all his debts. "My daughter has no idea she's marrying her own financial ruin," I said. "Are you going to warn her?" Augustine asked when I showed him the evidence. "She made her choice when she threw me out of her life," I answered coldly. "Now she'll learn that choices have consequences, and that the woman she despised was the only one who truly protected her." That night, from my desk in the chalet, I wrote 3 letters. One for Rachel, to be delivered at the perfect moment. One for Henry, my declaration of war. And one for Barbara, who would pay dearly for her role in my humiliation. Every word was calculated to cause the maximum emotional impact. The plan was complete. I would return 2 days before the wedding, check into the most luxurious hotel in the city, and make a series of public appearances that would leave everyone speechless. Rachel had wanted to get rid of her embarrassing mother. Very soon, she would come face to face with a woman who could buy and sell her entire new family without blinking. As I packed my finest jewelry and designer dresses, pieces I had kept stored for years, I smiled with anticipation. The little Rachel who once called me Mom with affection was about to discover that she had made the most expensive mistake of her life. My return to the city was exactly as I had planned. Stunning, elegant, and completely unexpected. The black Mercedes stopped in front of the Grand Palace Hotel, the most exclusive in the city, as a team of bellboys rushed to handle my luggage. I stepped out of the car completely transformed. My freshly cut hair styled by the best hands in Paris, a sleek red dress worth more than most people's yearly salary, and real diamonds sparkling under the hotel lights. The receptionist immediately recognized me as someone important, though she didn't know who I was. "Welcome to the Grand Palace, ma'am. Your presidential suite is ready." As I entered the private elevator, I caught the curious, admiring glances of the other guests. After 6 weeks of mourning for my daughter, I finally felt like the powerful woman I truly was. That very afternoon, following my carefully designed plan, I decided it was time for my first public appearance. I knew perfectly well the places Rachel and her social circle frequented. My first stop, the most exclusive boutique in the city, the one where I knew Barbara shopped regularly. It was time for the woman who had called me a distraction from the past to meet my true face. I entered the boutique like a silent storm. The sales clerks rushed to assist me, recognizing instantly the poise and confidence of a high-net-worth client. "How can we assist you, ma'am?" asked the manager with a servile smile. "I'd like to see your most exclusive collection," I said with quiet authority. "Price is not an issue." While I examined designer dresses worth thousands of dollars, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Margaret!" It was Barbara, her eyes wide, clearly unable to believe what she was seeing. I turned slowly, a calculated smile on my lips. "Barbara," I said with icy calm. "What a surprise to see you here." But you left," she stammered in confusion. "You thought I was what exactly?" I interrupted smoothly. "Begging somewhere. Living in a nursing home. Starving." Her cheeks flushed red with embarrassment as she realized I had heard every lie they had been spreading. At that moment, the clerk approached with 3 stunning, exorbitantly priced gowns in her arms. "Ma'am, these are our most exclusive designs," said the manager. "This Valentino costs $8,000, this Versace $10,000, and this limited edition Chanel $15,000. Without blinking, I pointed at all 3. "I'll take them all. And I'd also like to see your jewelry collection." Barbara stood frozen, watching me spend more money in 5 minutes than she made in an entire year. "I don't understand," she murmured. "Rachel said you had no money, that you were a financial burden." "My dear Barbara," I replied while trying on a diamond necklace worth $7,000, "it seems my daughter doesn't know her mother as well as she thought. As for the modest apartment and simple clothes," I added with patient condescension, "that's called discretion. Some of us need to make sure we're loved for who we are, not for what we own." Apparently, I had failed that test with my own daughter. The boutique manager returned with a tray of glittering jewels that shone like stars. "Which one do you prefer, ma'am?" I selected a diamond necklace, bracelet, and earring set worth $35,000. "This one is perfect. Charge it all to my black card." When I pulled out the unlimited credit card, Barbara nearly fainted. "Barbara," I said as I signed the receipt, "give Rachel a message from me. Tell her her embarrassing mother is back, and that on her wedding day, she'll receive a surprise she'll never forget." "Are you going to the wedding?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Oh no," I replied with a devilish smile. "She made it quite clear that I'm not welcome. But that doesn't mean I can't send a gift." I left the boutique, leaving Barbara completely confused and terrified. I knew that within an hour, Rachel would receive a hysterical call describing our encounter. Exactly what I wanted. She would know I was back but not why. That night, from my presidential suite, I called Elliot. "Are all the documents ready?" "Completely," he replied. "The property deeds, bank statements, audio recordings, the investigators' photos. All organized chronologically for maximum impact." "Perfect," I said. "Tomorrow is the wedding. It's time for Rachel to learn who her mother really is." But before sleeping, I had one more call to make. I dialed Maria's number. "Maria, how's the house?" "Mrs. Margaret, they're all hysterical," she said. Barbara rushed in to tell Rachel about the encounter at the boutique. Rachel is furious and confused. Henry's nervous. "No one understands how you could afford to spend that kind of money." "Have they said anything about canceling the wedding?" "Yes." "No, ma'am, but there's a lot of arguing. Rachel yelled at Barbara for lying about you, and Barbara insists she doesn't understand anything." The information was music to my ears. The chaos had begun, and tomorrow would be just the first act of a show with a devastating finale for everyone who had betrayed me. As I gazed at the city lights from my window, I thought of the little girl who once hugged me and told me I was the best mom in the world. That little girl was gone, replaced by a cruel woman who had thrown me out like garbage. Tomorrow, that woman would pay the price for her ingratitude. The wedding day dawned perfectly, ideal for my plan. While Rachel prepared for what she believed would be the happiest day of her life, I was finalizing the details of what would become her worst nightmare. From my presidential suite, I coordinated every move like a general planning a decisive battle. The war had begun, and I had all the weapons. My first move was to send a special gift to the church, a spectacular arrangement of white orchids with a card that read, "Asterisk for Rachel, on the most important day of her life. With love, the mother who is no longer a burden." Asterisk. I knew those words would make her uneasy, but that was just the appetizer for what was to come. While Rachel dressed in her bridal suite, I prepared for my grand entrance. The dress I had chosen was a masterpiece, an elegant black Armani gown worth more than the entire wedding budget. The jewelry that completed the outfit was worth as much as a house. Every detail had been calculated to show power, elegance, and restored dignity. At 2 p.m., as the ceremony began, I initiated the second phase of my plan. I called Augustine. "It's time for the press conference," I said. "Are you sure?" he asked. "After this, there's no turning back." "I'm more than sure," I replied. "It's time for the entire city to know the truth about Rachel's perfect family." The press conference was held in the hotel's main ballroom, at the exact same time as the wedding ceremony. Journalists from major outlets had gathered, drawn by the promise of an explosive revelation about one of the most talked-about weddings of the season. When I entered the hall, the silence was absolute. My transformation was so radical that many didn't recognize me at first. "My name is Margaret," I began, my voice firm and steady. "And I am the mother of Rachel, the bride who, right at this very moment, is getting married at St. Anthony's Church. I'm here to set the record straight about a few lies that have been spreading about me." The camera flashes started going off as the journalists realized they had stumbled upon an explosive story. "For the past few weeks," I continued, "my daughter has been telling everyone that her mother was a poor, helpless woman who left out of shame because she couldn't support herself." I paused dramatically as I held up the first set of documents. "The truth," I said, "is very different. I am the owner of a business empire valued at $34 million. The murmur in the room turned into a roar of shock. Journalists crowded closer, photographing the documents. Property deeds in 3 countries, bank statements, investment certificates. All authentic, all verifiable, all completely devastating to the version of the story Rachel had been telling. My daughter cut me out of her life because she was embarrassed to have a mother who, according to her, lacked the right social status," I said calmly, though the pain in my voice was unmistakable. What she doesn't know is that every dollar spent on her lavish wedding, every bit of education she received, every luxury she's enjoyed throughout her life, was financed by the company I built from scratch, working day and night for 40 years. At that moment, Augustine stepped up to the microphone holding more damning evidence. "We have proof," he announced, "that Miss Rachel has been attempting to sell properties that don't belong to her using falsified documents. We also have recordings in which she mocks her mother's supposed poverty and celebrates her disappearance as liberation." He played one of the recordings Maria had captured. Rachel's voice echoed throughout the ballroom. "Thank God she's gone. She was so pathetic, always trying to impress people with her cheap gifts. Henry says she's probably begging somewhere by now." The silence that followed was deafening. "But there's more," I continued, knowing the final blow would be devastating. "My future son-in-law, Henry, is not only completely bankrupt, but he's also been using my daughter's name to take out massive loans she knows nothing about. I have evidence that tomorrow, after their honeymoon, he plans to have her sign documents that will make her responsible for over 5 million pesos in debt." The journalists erupted in a storm of questions. "Why are you revealing this now?" one shouted. "Because a mother can forgive ingratitude," I answered with dignity, "but she cannot allow her daughter to be deceived and destroyed financially by a man who sees her only as his economic lifeline." "Are you going to reconcile with your daughter?" another reporter asked. "My daughter made her choice when she threw me out of her life, when she called me a miserable nobody. Now she will have to live with the consequences of rejecting the only person who truly loved her unconditionally." That very moment my phone rang. It was Maria calling from the church. "Mrs. Margaret," she said, breathless, "everything's in chaos here. Someone told them about the press conference. Rachel's hysterical. Henry looks pale as a corpse. Guests are leaving the church to check the news on their phones." "Did they get married?" I asked curiously. "Yes, but the reception's been cancelled," she replied. "Tell her she knows where to find me," I said before hanging up. The press conference ended with a statement I knew would make front-page headlines everywhere. "To all mothers watching this, love your children but never let love turn into self-destruction. And to all ungrateful children, remember the parents who raised you with sacrifice deserve respect, not humiliation." As I left the ballroom to the sound of applause and flashing cameras, I smiled with satisfaction. The first phase of my revenge was complete. Rachel had wanted a perfect wedding without her embarrassing mother. What she got instead was a ruined ceremony and a public scandal that would haunt her for the rest of her life. I didn't have to wait long for the confrontation. 2 hours after the press conference, Rachel stormed into my presidential suite like a furious hurricane. She had managed to convince hotel security that she was my daughter, which unfortunately she was. She burst in without knocking, still in her wedding dress, her makeup smeared from tears of rage and humiliation. "How could you do this to me?" she screamed from the doorway. "You ruined my wedding. You destroyed the most important day of my life." I sat calmly on the couch, sipping my tea as if nothing had happened. "Hello, Rachel," I said coolly. "You look beautiful though a bit agitated. How was the ceremony?" "Don't be cynical with me," she shouted, stepping closer, fists clenched. "All the guests left. The papers are publishing everything. My reputation is destroyed." "How curious," I replied without flinching. "A few weeks ago you told me exactly the same thing, that I was embarrassing, that I ruined your reputation, that you didn't want me to be part of your life. That was different." "Different how?" I cut her off, standing up for the first time. "Different because when you humiliated me in front of 40 people it was fine, but when I tell the truth in front of 40 journalists it's wrong." My voice stayed calm, but my eyes burned with a fury that had been held in for decades. Rachel was momentarily at a loss for words, realizing for the first time in her life that her mother was not apologizing or begging for forgiveness. "You're my mother," she said at last, as if that explained everything. "You were supposed to protect me, not betray me." "Exactly," I replied with a bitter smile. "I am your mother, and for 30 years I protected you, I sacrificed everything. I gave up my own happiness for yours. And how did you repay me? By throwing me away like trash. Rachel cried out desperately. Why didn't you ever tell me you had money? Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not for what I have. I answered her with genuine sadness. I wanted to make sure our love was real, not bought. Apparently I was wrong about both. At that moment Henry appeared at the door, sweating and panic-stricken. Margaret, he said with a trembling voice. We need to talk. This is all a huge misunderstanding. Ah, the groom, I said sarcastically. The man who told me this wasn't my scene, who suggested I leave because I was a burden to my own daughter. I didn't know, he began to stammer. You didn't know I had money. That's true, I interrupted. But you did know you were broke. You knew you had a lover. And you knew you planned to use my daughter to save your bankrupt business. Henry went white as paper. What are you talking about? I pulled out my phone and played the private investigator's video. Henry passionately kissing another woman in an upscale restaurant. Do you recognize this woman? Asked coldly. Because according to my investigation you've been sleeping with her throughout your relationship with Rachel. Rachel turned to her husband, eyes wide. Is this true? She asked in a broken voice. Henry tried to deny it, but I continued with the evidence. I also have the documents you were going to make her sign tomorrow. Contracts that would make her responsible for your 5 million pesos in debt. That's a lie. Henry shouted desperately. They're forged documents. Forged, I repeated with a wicked smile. Augustine, please come in. My lawyer stepped into the doorway holding a folder full of papers. Henry, Augustine said professionally, these documents were obtained directly from your notary. They are fully authenticated. Rachel collapsed into a chair, finally understanding the magnitude of what she had done. Not only had she thrown her millionaire mother out, but she had married a con man who planned to ruin her financially. This can't be happening, she murmured over and over. Oh, but there's more, I continued mercilessly. Henry, tell your wife about the loans you took out using her name as guarantor. Tell her about the mortgage you placed on the apartment she believes is hers. Tell her about the debts to the mob you have to pay by the end of the month. Henry fell silent, and his silence confirmed each of my accusations. Rachel stared at him with growing horror. Is it all true? She asked. Everything your mother said is true, he said. Rachel, I can explain, he began, but she cut him off with a slap that echoed through the suite. Did you use me? She yelled. You lied to me. I married a liar and a thief. How could you marry a man who despised your mother? I added calmly. Decisions have consequences, dear daughter, and you chose to believe him instead of defending me. Rachel turned to me with tears of despair. Mom, I'm sorry, I was wrong. Forgive me, please. Can we fix this? Can we? She asked, genuine desperation in her voice, the same tone she had once used when I begged her not to cast me out of her life. Remember what you told me? Yes. Do you remember what you said? You are no longer part of my life. You are the past, and the past is where you should stay. I didn't know, she cried, frantic. I didn't know you had money, that's the problem. I answered with infinite sadness. Your love for me depended on my bank account. When you thought I was poor, you tossed me aside. Now that you know I'm wealthy, you want me back. That's not love, Rachel, that's convenience. The silence that followed was devastating. For the first time in her life, Rachel faced the real consequences of her actions. She had lost her mother, she had married a con man, and her reputation was publicly ruined. All because she had chosen money and status over unconditional love. Rachel sat motionless for several minutes, absorbing the full devastation of her life. Henry tried to flee, but Augustine had quietly called hotel security and the police. Fraud and forgery charges were already being processed. My revenge was unfolding more perfectly than I had imagined, but I wasn't finished. Mom, Rachel said finally in a fractured voice. I know I was wrong, I know I was terrible to you, but you're my mother. You have to help me. I'm ruined. I have to help you, I replied. I repeated with icy irony. The way you helped me when you threw me out of your life. The way you helped me when you called me a miserable nobody. But I'm your daughter, she screamed, desperate. Mothers are supposed to love their children unconditionally. You're right, I answered with deadly calm. Mothers do love unconditionally. I loved you for 30 years without asking for anything in return. I gave you everything I had. I sacrificed my own happiness. I gave up love, comfort, and peace so that you could have the life I never had. And when I needed you most, when I needed your love and support, you threw me away like garbage. That moment my phone rang. It was the private investigator with fresh news. Mrs. Margaret, he said, Henry just tried to drain the joint bank account he shares with your daughter. He transferred everything to a Cayman Islands account. That information was the final nail in the coffin. Your husband just stole all your savings, I told Rachel. He transferred them to an offshore account 10 minutes ago. Rachel went pale, literally green. What? Yes, my dear, I said coldly. The man you chose over your own mother, the man you humiliated me for, has just left you penniless. Henry, who had been standing silently, waiting for a chance to escape, suddenly exploded. This is your fault, he shouted, pointing at me. Everything was perfect until you showed up with your lies. My lies. I laughed, a sound as sharp as ice. Which part was a lie? The $34 million. Your bankruptcy. Your mistress. The forged contracts. Everything I said is backed by proof. You ruined my life, he yelled. No, I said with absolute authority. You ruined your own life when you decided to scam my daughter. I simply made sure you both paid the price for your choices. At that moment, the police burst into the suite to arrest Henry. The charges included fraud, forgery, and identity theft. As they handcuffed him, he turned toward Rachel and screamed, "This isn't over. You'll pay for every cent I lost because of you." His true colors were finally on full display. Rachel realized she had married a man who not only never loved her, but blamed her for his own crimes. "Mom," Rachel said when we were finally alone, "I know you're angry. I know you want to punish me. But please don't leave me like this. I have no one else." "You have Barbara," I replied with cutting sarcasm. "The woman who told me to keep my distance because I lacked social status. I'm sure she'll help you now that you're the daughter-in-law of a criminal." "Barbara already turned her back on me," Rachel admitted shamefully. "When she found out about the scandal, she said her family couldn't be associated with me. She forbade me from ever going to her house again." "What a surprise," I said, showing no compassion. "Your new family abandons you at the first sign of trouble, unlike your mother, who endured 30 years of your ingratitude and only left when you threw her out." Just then, Maria arrived with more devastating news. "Miss Rachel," she said softly, "the creditors have already come to the house. They took everything: furniture, TV, computer, even your wedding dress. They say they have the legal right since you unknowingly signed as guarantor." Rachel completely collapsed. In less than 4 hours she had lost her husband, her money, her belongings, her reputation, and her in-laws. "What am I going to do?" she whispered, numb. "I have nothing. I have no one. Now you know exactly how I felt when you threw me out of your life," I said without a shred of sympathy. "The difference is that I was 70, and I had spent 30 years loving you unconditionally. You're 30, and you've just learned that decisions have consequences. Is there nothing I can do for you to forgive me?" she asked through sobs. "No way to earn back your love." "My love was never lost," I answered sadly. "But my respect, my trust, and my willingness to be your victim, those are gone forever." "So what's going to happen to me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You're going to learn to live alone, just like I had to when you threw me away," I said, rising to signal the end of our conversation. "You'll find a job. You'll pay your own bills. You'll face the consequences of choosing money and status over real love." "But Mom, I'm not your mom anymore," I interrupted with finality. "You said it yourself. I'm no longer part of your life. Your mother was a woman who sacrificed everything for you without asking for anything in return. That woman died the day you called her a miserable nobody and threw her out. I am Margaret, an independent, successful woman who no longer tolerates disrespect." Rachel left my suite in tears, finally understanding that she had lost the most precious thing she ever had: her mother's unconditional love. But it was too late for remorse. Some wounds never heal, and some words can never be taken back. She had made her choice, and now she would live with its consequences for the rest of her life. 6 months later, my life had found a peace I never thought possible. From my beautiful chalet in Switzerland, I could see the snow-covered mountains while I sipped my morning coffee. The calm was absolute, broken only by birdsong and the whisper of wind through the trees. For the first time in 70 years, I was living entirely for myself. Maria visited me once a month to bring news from the city. "Rachel found a job as a receptionist at a dental clinic," she said during her last visit. "She earns just enough to rent a small apartment in a modest neighborhood." Henry was sentenced to 5 years in prison for fraud and embezzlement. Barbara lost her social standing when it came out she'd been covering up her son's crimes. "She still asks about you," Maria added gently. "Every day," I replied with indifference. "But she's no longer my problem. She chose her path when she threw me out of her life. Now she must walk it alone." Maria nodded in understanding, though I could see pity in her eyes. Justice had been complete and merciless. The media had followed the story for months, turning it into a national symbol of filial ingratitude and its consequences. Rachel had lost not only her social status but most of her friends, who abandoned her when the scandal reached national headlines. Augustine still called me every week to update me on the legal proceedings. And each time I would smile, quietly, peacefully, knowing that the lesson had been delivered perfectly and irrevocably. Henry appealed his sentence, but it was rejected, Augustine informed me during our last conversation. He also tried to sue Rachel for emotional damages, but the judge dismissed the case as absurd. "What a pathetic man," I said without surprise. "Even in prison, he keeps blaming others for his own crimes." "Have you thought about contacting Rachel?" Augustine asked cautiously. "Elias told me she's been asking about you at the bank, trying to find out how to send you a letter." "No," I replied with absolute firmness. "That woman died for me the day she called me a miserable nobody. If she wants to reach me, she can do so through official channels, like any stranger." But Augustine's question stayed in my mind for days. Did I miss my daughter? The answer was complicated. I missed the little girl she once was, the child who hugged me after nightmares, the teenager who called me her best friend. But the cruel woman who threw me out like garbage? Well, I didn't miss her at all. One afternoon, while organizing old family photos, I found a letter Rachel had written to me when she was 8 years old. "Dear Mom," it said in her childish handwriting. *, "You are the best mom in the world. When I grow up I want to be just like you, strong, hardworking and loving. I love you more than all the stars and the moon together." Tears streamed down my cheeks as I read those innocent words. That night I wrote in my journal, "The little girl who wrote that letter would have defended her mother against anyone. She would have valued sacrifice and love above money and status. But that little girl grew up into a woman who chose cruelty over compassion. I cannot forgive the woman out of love for the child she once was." That autumn, Elias visited me with financial updates, and something else. "Margaret," he said, clearly hesitant, "Rachel tried to contact me. She wants to know if there's any chance for reconciliation. She says she completely understands what she did wrong and that she's willing to do anything to earn back your love." "Anything?" I asked with dry irony. "Does that include traveling back in time so she never called me a miserable nobody?" "She's destroyed," Elias insisted. "Physically, emotionally, financially. She's lost weight, she looks 10 years older. And according to Maria, she cries every day." "Well," I answered coldly, surprising even myself with the tone of my own voice, Now she knows exactly how I felt for 6 weeks when I thought I'd lost my only daughter to her own ingratitude. I spent the first anniversary of my departure in Paris, buying art for my new private gallery. As I walked through the Louvre, I thought about all the years I'd dreamed of traveling but gave up those dreams to pay for Rachel's education. Now I was 71 years old, a multimillionaire, and finally free to do everything I had postponed for motherhood. That night, from my suite at the Ritz Hotel, I called Maria for her monthly update. "Mrs. Margaret," she said in a sorrowful voice, "Rachel collapsed at work last week. They took her to the hospital. Malnutrition and stress. The doctors said her emotional state is critical." "I'm not surprised," I said without changing my tone. "Cruel decisions lead to cruel consequences." "She keeps asking if you'll ever forgive her," Maria continued softly. "She says she'd rather be dead than live knowing she's lost her mother forever." "She should have thought of that before she threw me out like trash," I replied, my voice as cold as the Parisian night outside. I too wanted to die for weeks after her betrayal. The difference is, I didn't deserve that pain. After hanging up, I stepped onto the balcony and gazed at the lights of Paris, the city of love. Irony at its finest. I had found peace, prosperity, and dignity, but I had forever lost the illusion of a daughter's unconditional love. It was a high price, but it was the price Rachel herself had placed on our relationship the day she chose to humiliate me in public. My final reflection came as I wrote the last lines of my memoirs. I do not regret adopting her when no one else wanted her. I do not regret sacrificing 30 years of my life for her happiness. I only regret not realizing sooner that kindness should never come at the cost of self-destruction. Unconditional love does not mean unconditional tolerance of abuse. I closed the book and locked it in my safe. The story was over. Margaret, the self-sacrificing, humiliated mother, was gone. In her place was Margaret, the free, prosperous woman at peace with herself. And for the first time in 71 years, that was enough. 5 years passed since that day that changed my life forever. Now, at 75, I stood on the terrace of my new villa on the French Riviera, watching the sun set over the Mediterranean. The peace I had found was so deep that sometimes I struggled to remember the broken woman I once was. Pain had turned into wisdom, and betrayal into liberation. My life had blossomed in ways I had never imagined possible. The art gallery I opened in Monte Carlo had become one of the most prestigious in Europe. My investments had grown to $50 million. But more important than material wealth was the emotional wealth I had discovered. The satisfaction of finally living for myself. Augustine visited every 3 months, not just as my lawyer, but as the loyal friend he had been for decades. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd reacted differently?" he asked during his last visit. "If you had forgiven her right away and kept being the same self-sacrificing mother?" "Every day," I replied honestly. "And every day I reached the same conclusion. I would have died inside. I would have remained the victim of my own goodness, teaching Rachel that she could mistreat me without consequence. In the end, I did her a favor. I taught her that every action has a price." Maria had stopped visiting after the 3rd year. News about Rachel had become too painful for both of us. The last I heard, she had tried to take her own life twice, had lost several jobs due to depression, and was now living almost like a beggar in a tiny studio apartment. And though a part of me still mourned the little girl she once was, I knew with certainty. Some lessons in life can only be learned through loss. Guilt was literally consuming her. "Don't you feel compassion for her?" Maria had asked me during our last conversation. "All the compassion in the world," I answered. "But compassion doesn't erase the damage done." I spent 70 years feeling compassion for everyone except myself. It was time to change that. One spring afternoon, while organizing my correspondence, I found a letter that had arrived weeks earlier, one my assistant had set aside under my orders. It was from Rachel. The shaky handwriting revealed the emotional state of the writer. I opened it for the first time in 5 years, more out of curiosity than nostalgia. "Dear Mom, I know I have no right to write to you after everything I did. I know I've forever lost the privilege of calling you that, but I need you to know that not a day goes by without me regretting every cruel word I said. I understand if you hate me, I hate myself too. Asterisk. I kept reading, torn between sadness and cold detachment. Asterisk. I've lost everything. My marriage, my money, my friends, my health, my dignity. But the worst thing I've lost is your love. I would rather live in poverty and loneliness than live knowing I destroyed the purest, most valuable relationship of my life. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it. I just want you to know that your daughter died the day she called you miserable. Asterisk. The final lines made my heart stop. Asterisk. If one day you ever wonder what became of the little girl who once loved you more than her own life, look for me in the cemetery, because the woman who betrayed you can no longer live with the weight of what she did. I love you, Mom. Forgive me in the next life. Asterisk. For the first time in 5 years I felt something close to panic. I immediately called Augustine. I need you to find Rachel, urgently, I said, my voice trembling. I think she's going to hurt herself. Do you want me to help her? He asked, surprised. After a long pause I replied, I want you to make sure she gets professional psychological care, but anonymously. That night I couldn't sleep. The letter had awakened something I thought was long dead, the maternal instinct. Not love for the woman who had betrayed me, but compassion for a human being suffering the consequences of her own choices. It was the difference between love and pity. 2 days later, Augustine called. We found her in time, he reported. She was at the hospital after another attempt. We transferred her to a private psychiatric clinic. Very reputable. The costs are covered by an anonymous donor, as you requested. Will she recover? I asked quietly. The doctors are optimistic, but they say it will take years of intensive therapy. She's desperate to see you, but I explained that her anonymous benefactor prefers to remain unnamed. Good, I said with a sigh of relief. I'm not ready for that, and maybe I never will be. 6 months later, Augustine brought me encouraging news. Rachel is responding well to treatment. She's taken full responsibility for destroying her own life. She doesn't blame anyone, not even Henry. The psychologists say it's the first step toward real recovery. She only asked about you once, when she was told someone was paying for her treatment. She asked if it was you. When they told her that information couldn't be disclosed, Augustine continued, she said, asterisk, it doesn't matter who it is. My mother already did enough for me for 30 years. This, I have to overcome on my own. Asterisk. Her words pierced my soul. For the first time in 5 years, Rachel was showing the maturity and humility I had always hoped for. But it was too late for reconciliation. The wound ran too deep, and I had built a new life with no room for the pain of the past. A year later, I received news that Rachel had been discharged. She'd found a job as a volunteer at a rehabilitation center, helping others who, like her, had hit rock bottom. Reports said she was a dedicated worker, never speaking about her past but showing remarkable compassion for those who had lost their families because of their own actions. Will you ever contact her? Augustine asked during one of our dinners. No, I answered with absolute certainty. She learned her lesson and I learned mine. We're two different women now. The love that once bound us died with the words she spoke that day. As I write these final lines in my diary at 76, I can say honestly, I regret nothing, not loving unconditionally for 30 years, nor ending that love when it became self-destructive. I learned that forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation, and that loving someone sometimes means letting them go forever. Rachel and I now live in parallel worlds. She rebuilding her life from the ashes of her mistakes, and I living the rest of mine free from the emotional weight of the past. We both learned valuable lessons. She learned that words have the power to destroy forever. I learned that it's never too late to choose yourself. Motherly love hadn't completely died. It had transformed into something wiser. The ability to love from afar, without allowing that love to turn into vulnerability again. In the end, the greatest lesson I could ever give my daughter was this. Even the purest love has limits that, once crossed, carry consequences that last a lifetime.